All right, welcome back. Picking up from where we left off yesterday, last time we started to set up OpenAPI configuration using Swagger for our REST endpoints, and I accidentally deleted everything, so I brought it back, used a get restore to bring the files back, and then used IDE local history to re-add these updates that I had in place that weren't committed. So yeah, now we're back on track. So what I want to do now is flesh out these annotations that we just copy pasted on here, and make it more complete, and then we'll go from there. So let's open up this operation. We'll split it down so that we can see everything. All right, so the first thing they have in here is a method, which by default it pulls from here, so we don't actually need that one. It'll know that this is a delete, or using the delete method. So tags we'll add a tag. We'll call this is going to be in the to-do items group. So basically a tag will put this into a particular group with other endpoints, and we'll see this once we show this in a browser. All right, next is summary. So the summary of this endpoint is very, very brief, so we'll call it delete item. The description is more space for what this endpoint actually does. Sentences, you can actually even put markdown in here. In fact, let's do that. So delete item. The only problem is having to do all this string concatenation, which is a pain. Let me put another. So something like, yeah, like we could have bullets in here and everything. We could have all the markdown. I'm just gonna make this short and simple, just as an example. Something like that. Next is the request body. Now this is a delete, so we don't actually have a request body, so we can leave that out. External documentation, so if we had links to external documentation, then we could add those in here, a description to it, about it, a URL that links to it, but we don't have any external documentation, so we'll leave that out. Next is an operation ID. I'll just call this delete item. Basically, this is just a unique ID given to each operation. I suspect you don't actually have to specify one, and then it'll be created automatically. Next is parameters. We do have some parameters. We have 2 path parameters, so let's go ahead and add those. We do have, it is an array, so I'll use braces here to separate them. So we'll have 2 of these. Let's go ahead and open up. Actually, I'll open it from down here. So parameters have a few things. Name. So our name we can see here in the string, and we can see it up here as well. So those need to line up. In. So we have a few options here. In our case, our parameter is in the path, so we'll specify that. And then description. So we'll put the description for this is the unique ID of the list containing the item to delete. This is required because it's in the path. It is not deprecated. The default there is false, so we'll leave that false. Allow empty value. The default is false, which is correct. I don't know what parameter style is. So I'll leave this blank. We don't really have a style. It's not delimited or anything like that. Explode. I don't know what explode is either. We'll leave that out. Allow reserved. I guess that means whether you can have reserved words in there. I'll leave that out as well. Schema. So if our parameter actually had a schema, then we could specify it here. Our schema is just a string. So we could do that. Probably not necessary for the simple, simple strings. We're not providing any value by adding that necessarily. It isn't an array schema, it's just one. The content, we don't actually have any content yet. It's not hidden. We can put some examples in. So we have two options. We can have example objects or an example string. Let's just do an example string. Extensions and ref, we'll leave those out as well. All right, so there's one parameter. The other is ID, or maybe item ID. ID. It's also in the path. It's also a string. It's also required. Okay, we'll do that. All right, let's get rid of parameter. Next is API responses, which we've already copy pasted a couple. So we'll expand this a little bit. So they have a description and a response code. So the description for this one is successfully deleted the requested item. Response code is a string, so we'll leave it as 200 here. I'd like to use an actual enumeration value for that, but since it's a string, we'll just do that. We'll hard code it. Next is headers. So we're not actually, we are responding with our course headers, but we don't actually need to describe that in this endpoint specifically. We could have a separate higher level header description if we wanted to. I'm going to leave that out. We don't have any links. We are going to specify content, which is the content of what we're returning. And we do have some fields in there already. So we've got a media type. Next is examples. And we could have multiple examples here. So let's look and see what an example object looks like. So a name. So what kind of name do we want to give our example object? So I guess we'll just call it success. Can't resolve symbol name. Is this the right? I think that's the wrong. No, I think it could be just because let me get rid of these for a second. Now it doesn't want to import it. Let me actually just start all over. Oh, I didn't have an add in it. Okay, example object. There we go. Brain stopped working there for a second. So name. This is going to be our successful return example object. we're actually only going to have one example. Oops. Things aren't working this morning. Okay, so summary. The value. Now, I believe this can be marked down. All of these can be marked down, but it's a string, so we could actually put in what our JSON looks like, which again is annoying because we have to escape everything. So something like what else we have? Task. Whatever. And done. Okay, so there's an example item. All right. We don't have any external values. We don't have any extensions. Okay, last is description. My summary needs to be smaller. Okay, that's probably good enough. Okay, let's close out of the example, back to content. So our schema is a to-do item. Schemas do have other things in them, like classes and things. Let's go ahead and give it a name and a title. Actually, let's put implementation first. Something like that. Maximum, minimums, all kinds of stuff, properties, formats, descriptions. Maybe I should make this different from the title. I'm pretty much just putting sample values in here so that we can see it in the user interface, and then we can tweak it after that. So there's more examples and things. I'm going to leave this stuff blank. And so let's go back to our content. What else is in here? So we have schema, so we don't need an array schema. We'll leave encoding and extensions out. So we'll leave out extensions and ref here. So that's all for at least this one API response. We'll do similar because we can get multiple responses. Yeah, so we could get a 404 here. We could get a 500. If there's a server problem, this should actually be a 404. So I'm basically just going to copy paste this, and we'll do 404. Okay, in this example, our response isn't a to-do item, it's an error response. All right, so we'll do that. Error responses have a status. message all right, provides an example. Okay. Something like that. I'm only going to do 2 of these, just so we can move on from this. But that's effectively, well, let me go back to operation. There might be more things in here. So deprecated is false. Security requirement. We're not gonna provide security requirements at this level. We may put security requirements in our OpenAPI configuration. Security required for everything. We're not going to do servers at this level or extensions. It's not hidden. I don't know what ignore JSON view means, so we'll wrap it up there. It's already quite big, and there are still more API responses that we could have in here. I mentioned 500 and probably others as well, like method not found, 405. Or, yeah, I guess that's unlikely since we do support multiple methods for this endpoint. But anyway, let's move on. So now that we've got that up and running, we should be able to run our server. All right, so our server's up and running. Let's bring a browser over. Localhost. API. Okay, here we go. So our OpenAPI endpoints are mapped here, but we didn't provide any headers, which makes sense. So let's do this via curl. All right, so here's some headers that we had before. So we're hitting API OpenAPI.json. We're passing in our 3 required security headers. And here we go. Here's our, I do see an exception, but we got a bunch of JSON output as well. And what was this exception? Oh, that exception was from our previous curl. And this one is from our newest curl. So it picked up this one's from the browser, this one's from curl. So it picked up our user that we passed in, and it recognized our endpoint. Now really what we want is to not restrict this OpenAPI endpoint and make it available to everybody. So let's go update our security filter, and let's go allow those requests to come through without requiring these headers. So container request context, get URI info, get request URI, get path. So if that equals or starts with, we'll do API, OpenAPI. So that way if we have this one and we use an accept header, or if we stick .json at the end or .yaml at the end, they'll all match this pattern, and we'll just return. So in this case, we won't actually do any kind of security validation. We're not going to throw any exceptions if things are missing. So let's go ahead and run our server again. And once that comes up, all right, server's listening. I can refresh this, and now we can see our JSON. So this top level stuff comes from our OpenAPI configuration YAML. So that stuff there. We get our license, we get our description, we get our version. Our version isn't, we haven't run Maven yet to tweak this at all. So it's still it didn't do the variable substitution, so it's still the variable. And then we get our paths here. A lot of this is default information with default values. Somewhere in here is our delete that we modified. So let's move that aside. The next thing we want to do is, let me bring that browser back. Let's go to Redoc. Let's go to this Redoc website. So Redoc provides a quick and easy way to view OpenAPI JSON files in a nice, pretty interface, kind of like this example here. So if I scroll down a little bit, somewhere in here, okay, here we go. So here's a code example of how to incorporate it. I'm just going to copy this HTML over here. So in our server, we have this www directory with an index. Let's paste that in, get rid of our stuff here. Call this tutorial API. We don't need to change fonts or anything. Comments look good, styles look good. So let's update this Redoc spec to localhost 8443 API OpenAPI.json. All right, so now if we start our server, all right, server's running. Let's come back here. Let's chop this off to get our index page. And now we get our Redoc interface. Okay, so this is the default page. We've got these ones up here, which are the ones I didn't modify. And then we've got the one I did modify. Let me move this over so I can see both at the same time. Let's close this and this and this. And let's minimize this. So I put a tag on it of to-do items. Come back browser. That's where this drop down came from. We've got a summary of delete item, which is here. We've got markdown for our description. So that's what this is. So the summary, so it looks like this is an H1, and then we get for free our summary as an H2, and then I added another H2 basically in the markdown, which are these two pound signs in markdown would be an H2. So that's why we got duplicate items here. So really in our markdown, we won't, if we're going to have sections, then it should start with an H3 at the least. So anyway, then we got our text after that. Our operation ID is delete item. We don't actually see that on here, but if we looked at the JSON, we would see it in there. Next is parameters, which is these. Now, as it turns out, so I specified parameters up here, but I think, so since we have everything duplicated, I think that means I should have added parameter annotations on these actual parameters down here. So that's why we have duplicates. We can come back and fix that. I do see the examples in here for both of them, and the description. It automatically picks up the type. So adding our schema didn't really do anything. And then we have our two responses that we have. Our responses also show up over here on the right. This is actually wrong. It doesn't have a /API in there, so this path isn't quite correct. It's close, but it is off a little bit. How do I close that? So our 200 did pick up our response schema for our to-do item. It doesn't actually call this a to-do item because we didn't put any annotations on our to-do item object itself. But it did pull out the fields. It did pull out our requirements, or not requirements, our validation information. 0 isn't quite correct, but we didn't specify a minimum. We only specified the not empty annotation. So I could put a minimum of 1 in there. And we have our example information over here. 404 also has an example, and it looks good. It looks like JSON. We can copy it. It's got our content type. So all that looks good. 404 looks not as good because we don't have any annotations or anything on our error response object, so it's kind of bland, but overall it's looking pretty good for a first cut. So what I'll do is, well, one thing I noticed, so we've got this get to do item _1 and get to do item. That means one of these. So this text here comes from the method. So get to do item, this one actually doesn't have the item ID on it. So this is get all to do items, and this one is get to do item. That takes one. So that's a copy paste, but what that effectively means is, yeah, get all to do items should be get all to do items here. So that would clear up these default values so that we don't have duplicates and end up with _1s. But once I go through and update them, they'll have real names like this, not the method names. So yeah, I'll go ahead and do that offline. I'll add all the annotations for all of these, and then we'll come back after that and continue on. All right, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.